pain, remorse, regret I feel in my heart.
The 33-year-old wigmaker who plowed her car into a family crossing a Brooklyn sidewalk has been handed what many are now calling a sweetheart deal, despite an apparent history of reckless and dangerous driving. One of Miriam Yarimi's attorneys seemed to dab her eyes with a tissue as she stood handcuffed in court and apologized for her actions. But it's her own words behind the scenes on recorded phone calls that tell a very different story. We are trying to make sense of how this sentence happened. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. By the way, before we get into this more, I gotta ask something. It just happened to me the other day. Have you ever been in a meeting and at the end of it, after 30 minutes, after an hour, you say to yourself, what do we just talk about for that? Like, what do we decide? If so, if you're like me, I gotta tell you about this, okay? The Plod NoPen. This tiny AI-powered device, it is more than just a recorder. It is like a hands-free AI secretary that you can carry with you every day. So whether it's meetings, interviews, brainstorms, the NoPen doesn't just catch everything. It also identifies key points, it expands into summaries, it delivers role-specific action items to keep your whole team aligned. And the best feature, I think, ask Plod. Because instead of going through all these hours of notes, you can ask it to hunt for answers like, hey Plod, what hot trials did we talk about covering next year? And Plod will pull up that conversation. So if you're over messy notes, it's time to try Plod NoPen right now. You can get 20% off with code SIDEBAR20. Just click the link below or scan the QR code. A New York social media influencer's complete disregard for the safety of anybody around her, blowing through a red light in Brooklyn earlier this year with the accelerator of her luxury car pressed all the way to the floor. Her decision to run that light, it set off a deadly domino effect. It killed a mother and two of her children, and it left a community devastated. We're talking about 33-year-old Miriam Yarimi. Now, public records show that she had racked up nearly 100 tickets in just a few years' span, had thousands of dollars in unpaid fines. She was driving her Audi on Ocean Parkway in March when she collided with a rideshare that was trying to turn. The impact caused the Audi to roll multiple times straight into Natasha Saada and her three children who were in the crosswalk. The mother and her daughters, aged 5 and 8, they died from catastrophic injuries. And Natasha's son, who was just 4 years old, he survived but was hospitalized in critical condition. According to ABC7, this boy had skull fractures, a brain bleed. He had to have a kidney removed. The family in the rideshare and its driver, they went to the hospital, only had minor injuries, but this was catastrophic. And Yarimi herself, she was pulled from the car, which had again landed upside down. The whole crash, according to New York officials, was caught on surveillance cameras, so you can talk about a strong case here. And according to the Brooklyn DA's office, there was data from that car, from the Audi, that indicated she had the accelerator pressed all the way to the floor and didn't apply the brakes, traveling 68 miles per hour in a 25 mile per hour zone. The DA's office also says that Yarimi was using her cell phone and taking a selfie when she ran that light. Now, Yarimi was this self-proclaimed wig influencer on social media. She often posted content showcasing wigs that she made for clients or herself. And the Audi that she was driving that day had a custom license plate that read wigmaker. So if you're talking about how do you properly ID somebody, there you go. When she was cut out of that car, Yarimi, who had just minor injuries, allegedly told first responders that agents from the CIA were out to get her, and also stated that she, quote, had the devil in her. This is according to reports. So she was taken to Bellevue Hospital for an evaluation, and since then she's been incarcerated. But in October, Yarimi entered a guilty plea to 3 counts of second-degree manslaughter after initially facing 20 charges, including criminally negligent homicide. And when it came to sentencing, what her punishment would be after taking 3 lives, the prosecution, the judge, they were at odds. They were at odds over how long she should spend in prison. This may shock you. To talk about this, to talk about Yarimi's punishment and the shocking new details revealed in the prosecution's sentencing memorandum, I want to welcome back on trial attorney Alea Roberts to the studio. Alea, thanks so much for coming on. It's good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Jesse.
You know, this is a crash that really is, I don't care where you are in the country, It is shocking, to say the least. It's so upsetting. It rocked this area, though, especially the Jewish community, which Natasha and her family belong to, and it really put a spotlight on reckless driving, the consequences. I mean, I can't tell you how many times you drive and you see people on their phone. You see people just doing things like this. But the part about this, that it's not just what she did, it's the buildup to it as well. That's what I think makes it so egregious. What were your initial thoughts, before we even get into sentencing, what were your initial thoughts about how egregious this case was?
I definitely agree, Jesse. I think the accelerator being all the way to the floor and no indication that the brakes were ever used is very concerning, and arguably, depending on how long that she was driving, I wouldn't have done second degree. I would have tried to argue there was some sort of premeditation there. You're thinking about the fact that your foot is on the gas, right? You're driving, you know for a fact that that's a reckless indifference to another life. You're operating a vehicle that can cause an accident. So the fact that you're speeding, you're doing 68 and 25.
They would have to establish she intended to kill them, right?
Yeah. But then we could also argue depraved heart or reckless indifference for a human life, right? So on a different level of, obviously we have a premeditation element, but there's also a reckless indifference element that we could, right? We're talking about what the prosecution could have done. In this instance, they didn't. But I think the problem is, selfie aside, right? Of course, people use their phones. We know no one should do it. We know you shouldn't operate your phone while using a vehicle. But on top of her using the gas and accelerating the gas, being aware of where you are. It wasn't like she was, on a highway doing this. Not that would make it any better. You're in a zone where there are pedestrians that are walking. You're in a neighborhood or residential area. The speed limit is 25. You're driving 40 miles over the speed limit plus. It's ridiculous.
Are you not surprised that she pled guilty? Because if you look at the data from the car, the surveillance, this crime scene, it tells so much of the story. I don't know what her defense would have been at trial. It seems like pleading guilty was her best option.
It seems that she was trying to set up an insanity defense, right? By saying the devil is inside of me, by trying to get a mental health evaluation. I'm sure if it did go to trial, the defense would have had some sort of mental health expert that said that she was diagnosed with some sort of disorder that relayed with her, that was a result of her being in this accident. It was the disorder that caused her to not be aware that, she was speeding or that she was aware of the risk to other human lives. I'm sure that's where they were going, but fortunately, we didn't have to go to trial on this.
I need your professional opinion, your professional explanation about this sentence, because we're going to get into this. A lot of people are upset.
Yeah.
Okay? When Yarimi agreed to plead guilty, the state had recommended the maximum penalty, 5 to 15 years in prison. The judge had a different idea, offering Yarimi a sentence of 3 to 9 years, something that some have called a slap on the wrist for Yarimi and a slap in the face for Natasha's family. On Wednesday, Justice Danny Chun told the court, "I've been persistent throughout my career that when the defendant offers to plead guilty, generally the maximum offer is not given. When the defendant wants to plead guilty and accept responsibility." Explain this to me, because she could be out. I mean, let's first start there. Whether or not she'll ever be able to operate a car, we'll get into that. What do you think of that? 3 years minimum, maybe?
I think that it's a joke. I think that this is one of those situations where you wonder if, and I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but sometimes when you have had certain cases, the prosecution, the defense attorney who know each other, and then you get some sort of plea deal or plea arrangement going on. Well, this was her first offense, and et cetera, but it wasn't. And that's what's upsetting me in this sentence, is the fact that there was this long list of vehicular charges regarding to speeding and regarding all these speeding tickets that she had, all this history of her driving that it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that something would have happened or could have happened. And the fact that she has all those previous citations for her driving shows that I could make the argument as a prosecutor, she's a reckless driver.
If she gets 3 years, that's like 1 year for each life, right?
Yes.
But there's no guarantee. She could serve potentially all 9.
She could. If they argue that she'd have to serve the entire time of her sentence without any early release for good behavior, right? Because if you're thinking about, when you start considering potential, like serve 80% of my sentence and then I get out after serving 80% of my sentence, she might have only done,
But that's an uphill battle for her, given all the circumstances of this.
For sure. But you go into prison and then you're nice to all the prisoners and then you go get your GED or you get some sort of education and then you help clean up and then it's like, look, I have good behavior.
I guess the question is, There is a point to what the justice said here, that if someone pleads guilty, they're pleading guilty for a reason. For obviously, you don't take this to trial. A jury is not exposed to it. It saves time and expense. You're admitting guilt. There should be something that potentially, not in every case, but maybe in cases where there's a range of punishment, something that should be offered to the defendant. But why not do 5 to 10? You know, I mean, those years are significant, and the concern I think people have is, what message does this send? For
sure, I definitely agree, and I think my thing about this case was she was a self-proclaimed influencer, right? We're living in a time in which influencers and content creators are deemed celebrities, and they have that sort of celebrity protection. So I was thinking, well, was she big enough to have some sort of defense of, like, she's this self-proclaimed influencer? Are we letting influencers get away with certain things that we wouldn't let the normal person do that? Because Jesse, I can promise you right now, if I was the defendant in this case, I would not be serving, and I'm an attorney, right? I would not be serving 3 to 7 years, right? It's, like you said, if she serves 3 or 3 to 9, if she serves 1 year per life, if she gets the least amount of sentencing. I'm not saying that she would, but the fact that she could get 3 years, that means, like you said, it's 1 year per life.
If she gets released in the next several years, are there going to be any restrictions put on her ability to drive?
I mean, if the prosecution is smart, I'm not saying that they're not, but I would put in that plea agreement that she could never operate a vehicle ever again. That's something, or at least, like, she'd have to not be able to operate a vehicle for a certain amount of time, and then have to take a driving test, classes, all the things that you would normally take, like if you had a DUI offense or a speeding ticket, those classes that you take, the driving classes, to make sure that you actually know how to safely operate a vehicle. And then after taking a road test again and passing that, I still would have certain restrictions on her license, even if she got her license back.
I want to play you something. So Yarimi herself appeared remorseful, sobbing as she read a statement. Take a listen.
There's a lot of sorrow and pain, remorse, regret I feel in my heart. For causing such an unspeakable tragedy. I accept full responsibility. I think about the victims every day. It's not a day that goes by where I don't think about what I've done, what I did, what happened.
And Yarimi also said in her statement, quote, "I'd like to thank Judge Chun for his gracious offer here, and I'll have to deal with this for the rest of my life. I think that's the punishment in itself." But in its sentencing memorandum filed ahead of the hearing, District Attorney Eric Gonzalez blasted Yarimi for her actions and laid out the ways that she's shown she's actually not sorry for what she did, because the DA wrote that Yarimi drove in a, quote, "impressively reckless and selfish manner." Quote, "The defendant sped. She used her cell phone while driving. She blew through multiple red lights. Unsurprisingly, the defendant, concerned only with her own safety, wore her own seatbelt. Unfortunately, she remained disinterested in who else she put at risk. Her actions affected the lives of so many that day. 3 separate families, 9 separate victims. They never stood a chance against the defendant's 68-mile-per-hour, 2-ton weapon." We never think about that, but it really is a weapon. A car is a weapon. And the DA continued, "As the defendant's car was careening across Ocean Parkway, the Saada family was crossing the street. They were coming from synagogue on Shabbat. They had the walk sign. They were in the crosswalk. They were holding hands. They did everything right that day except having the catastrophic misfortune of being in the way of Miriam Yarimi." And I think that highlights the lack of defense. You couldn't put the blame on the family here. The judge put that into account, didn't put it into account? Because that's, again, that's pretty strong words.
I definitely agree, and I still don't quite understand the rationale. I guess if you're thinking maybe like this was her first time offense, arguably, because speeding tickets and citations aren't considered offenses, right? Like she's never, if she has no criminal background or criminal history, maybe we're taking that into account. But I feel that the judge did not consider the severity of the crime. There are lives that were lost, and not just one life, multiple lives were lost. And as the DA said, multiple families were affected, right? And unfortunately, granted, the family that were in the Uber, the passengers that were in the Uber or the Lyft, the vehicle that the defendant actually came into contact with, even though they didn't die, thank God, they're still with us, but they also sustained injuries.
Yeah, of
so
course.
it wasn't the fact that you've killed these people, you've injured these other people, and as you said, Jesse, a car is a weapon. I think as people every day we don't consider that, but as we see right now, like this loss caused the loss of multiple lives.
And your thoughts on this, because the sentencing memorandum also revealed these shocking quotes from the defendant, Ms. Yarimi, apparently made on recorded jailhouse phone calls. So many times defendants don't realize that they're being recorded, or maybe they do. But according to the prosecution, quote, while at the Department of Correction, the defendant has made hundreds of phone calls. Most have been to her ex-husband, with whom they have a child in common, or her mother. On innumerable occasions, the defendant has disclosed the facts of this case. She has seen the videos, she has heard the stories. It is apparent she knows the gravity of her offenses, yet still approached this case with entitlement. And the document includes several examples, and I will tell you right now, they're pretty rage-inducing. I think that's a fair way to describe it. Here's one, quote, her ex-husband recommended apologizing. The defendant's response was sharp and clear. Why should I apologize? I'm just as much of a victim as they are. Another example says, on April 30th, 2025, the defendant stated to her ex-husband, you always know how to contact people to get out of trouble. Why can't you contact the judge to get me out? Now, her sense of entitlement continued into the next day, on May 1st, 2025, when she asked, why isn't the Jewish community helping me? And a third, on April 22nd, 2025, the defendant was complaining about her incarceration to her ex-husband, including that she was being framed. She continued to discuss and stated that, quote, I am playing the games. I could also pretend, I could also, put on a show like, why don't I just pretend I'm schizophrenic? Which part of that angers you the most?
Which part, Jesse? All of it. I think the biggest part is, why don't you call the judge and help me get out? Right? I'm being framed. How are you being framed if you saw the video? You were in the car. Was it somebody else in the car? Was there a little somebody in your head telling you what to do, right? And now all of a sudden you're schizophrenic, which, as I said earlier, you're trying to lay the foundation for some sort of insanity defense if she did not plead guilty, right? Oh, now I didn't know. My disease made me do it, or my illness made me do it. And honestly, people who are actually ill and who actually suffer from mental illness and do unfortunately have situations happen like this, what a slap in the face it is to them, right? To mental health individuals, to people who are actual victims. How, in what world would this woman be deemed as a victim in any circumstance at all? Like, you did something wrong, but now you're the victim. Like, take responsibility, serve your time, serve your sentence, and come out better. This incarceration, all these calls made it very clear that she wasn't sorry.
By the way, I want to get into finances too, but it also makes me struggle when you have the sentencing range and these options that could have been presented to the judge. I do wonder sometimes if the judge goes on a more lenient side in the hopes that, well, no, what am I talking about? Well, I mean, you tell me. If someone pleads guilty, they aren't necessarily agreeing to what the sentence is. Do they forfeit their right to appeal the sentence? Obviously, they're not forfeiting. They're forfeiting their right to. They're pleading guilty. But if the judge comes back with a sentence like that's really harsh, could they potentially appeal this? And the judge might say, "Listen, I don't want this going up to a higher court where the defendant's going to appeal it. It's overturned. It comes back." Or am I not thinking about it the right way?
Well, I think that a judge should never be concerned about being appealed if they're making the right call.
Right.
If you know for a fact that this is the sentence justifies the crime, then you shouldn't be concerned about being appealed because you did what you were supposed to do, right? That's why we have sentencing guidelines, right? Even if it's if you gave them the max, well, you killed 3 people, so you should get the max, right? Or if you gave them a minimum amount of time, the defendant's not going to appeal that because it's I got off with a slap on the wrist. But to answer your question, of course, the defendant can appeal their sentence if it was, let's say you got 20 years and that wasn't based off of the guidelines. You can say that's appealable, that,
unless there was something in the agreement that says you're fully accepting this and not going to appeal it.
Correct. And usually one would hope that prosecutors actually include that, because the whole point is to not tie up the court's time, right?
Yeah,
you're saying that I'm guilty, you're saying that I admit it, you're saying I'm serving my sentence, whatever that sentence is, I'm agreeing to serve it, and that's it. I'm
just trying to make sense of this, because the more I read it, the more frustrated I get. I mean, the sentencing memorandum also talks about Yarimi's finances. Let's talk about that. So she portrayed herself on social media as having access to serious money, showed off luxury goods, designer items, all on Instagram and TikTok. The prosecution says that she had access to multiple homes, lied about her official address when questioned at the hospital, and on those jail calls, she allegedly talked about wanting to hide her money. Quote, in recorded phone calls between October 22nd, 2025 and October 26, 2025, that's like a minute ago, the defendant references her civil suit and her finances and her intent to move her money to South America. The defendant has even attempted to deflect her civil liabilities by countersuing the Uber that she struck. Now, an attorney for the Saada family has indicated that the family is considering filing a wrongful death lawsuit. This is according to the New York Post. That's not surprising, right?
No, not at all. And I think that, unfortunately, because she has not actually been, even though she's been deemed guilty, civilly, they still have to prove their case. So her moving her money before the civil lawsuit comes into effect, or is actually sued, it's not a crime. It's horrible because we know why she's doing it, but it's not a crime in and of itself. There's nothing that's prohibiting her from moving her money. But I want to go back to something that she said earlier, that it doesn't make sense. One of my really, really great friends says that sometimes you can't make it make sense because it doesn't. There's no situation in which an individual who causes the death of three lives, of three people, should ever get 3 years in prison. And we know that that's the least amount, right? But even the fact that that's even a possibility in this case is enraging for the families, for the people, for everyday individuals who want people who drive recklessly on the road to be held accountable.
But I will tell you, this presents an uphill battle for her later on to say after 3 years she should be released, because all of this is presumably going to come up, and they're going to have to determine whether or not she's being legit and real and remorseful when she comes up in 3 years, because this appears to be somebody who can't be trusted.
For sure. I definitely agree.
Yeah.
Definitely agree.
Now, the Saada family, they weren't in court for Yarimi's sentencing. Their attorney, Herschel Kalevsky, said they didn't want to see her. He told reporters outside court, "This sends a clear message that reckless driving, it's not so bad. She's been driving recklessly for a long, long time." He also said this was the first time that she'd ever expressed any remorse, and that it was all a show for the judge and the cameras. Again, we've been talking about it. It's hard to disagree with that. What does the family do? What do families of these absolute tragedies do? How do they move forward?
Well, unfortunately, the legal answer is to sue civilly, right?
Yeah.
That's the short end of the stick. But from a personal, as an empath of myself, like, go to counseling, go to grief therapy, right? Hug your loved ones a little bit tighter, and really, really just look to whatever you can find, those happy moments, those wonderful moments that you had with your family before they were no longer with you. I think it's really, really, it's a horrible message that we are sending in our courts, considering that there's certain people, essentially you're telling people, if you have access to money and you have access to certain defenses, that, you might get off the slap on the wrist. And again, we know that I don't think that this woman's going to get 3 years. I really don't think that.
More?
I think she's definitely going to get more. But the fact that that's even a possibility is scary. It's scary because we've all been pedestrians. At some point, we're in the tri-state area, right? I've gone walking on Ocean Parkway in Brooklyn before. I've been in that area before, just walking around, going to a friend's house or doing whatever. Do I have to fear that I'm going to get hit by a reckless content creator, taking a selfie at the red light or speeding through red lights? It's scary. It's very scary.
It's very scary. It seems like this family has a ton of support, particularly from the community, and, just thoughts, prayers, and well wishes to them as they try to navigate this. Alea Roberts,
Sure.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Great
Appreciate
seeing you, Jesse.
it.
Always a pleasure.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow me on X or Instagram. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.